Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SEC Breakdown, our weekly college football show. Guys, we're about at the midpoint of the SEC schedule here. Some teams have their bye this week. Kind of at this juncture of the season, it's a good time to evaluate. Are things going as we thought? Are they going differently? So far, what's stood out to you? What impressions do you guys have from the first half of the season? And maybe what are some big surprises or disappointments that have stood out around the league?
If I can start with a disappointment, can I throw LSU in that category? I watched them play Auburn this past weekend at Jordan-Hare Stadium, and I thought going in that, given what they had shown against South Carolina the week before, they might come in and make it kind of a back and forth game. And Auburn broke them pretty fast. And I don't think that Auburn team is particularly great. It played its best game of the season, but that LSU team looked like it kind of quit in that game. It was scoreless going into the second quarter, and they lost 48-11. I think we all thought they'd drop a little bit this year, given how much they lost from last year. But to see them go from a team that was the national champion undefeated to a team that may not win another game this season, looking at their schedule with 3 ranked teams left on it, that's, to me, probably the biggest disappointment in the conference this year.
Yeah, I think having Arkansas and LSU both with the same record 5 games into the season was probably something we didn't see coming. I guess I haven't been surprised, Blake, by Tennessee, but I've been a little underwhelmed, I guess you would say. I thought Tennessee would be that third team in the East, a little bit closer to Georgia and Florida than I think they have been so far.
Yeah, for sure. I think the hope in Tennessee's camp was that there would be some progress shown toward the Georgia, Florida tier of the East. And even if there wasn't a victory in those games, it would at least be progress. And in fact, it's been the opposite. There seems to be some regression with a blowout loss to Georgia, blowout to Alabama, and then that ugly loss to Kentucky. I think for me, I'll throw out one of the bigger surprises is that Georgia's still with quarterback Stetson Bennett. With as much talent as generally recruits has on that roster, I never would have believed at the beginning of this season that former walk-on Stetson Bennett would be, who's basically a caretaker for that offense, would still be Georgia's quarterback going into the Florida game.
I am a little surprised that they hadn't changed quarterbacks. I assume if they had somebody that was healthy and ready to go, they'd experiment with that. But I don't think whoever they put out there short of Justin Fields, which is a different discussion, that they really have explosive playmakers on offense around him. Good players, but not somebody that's going to break a game open, not an Isaiah Spiller type of running back at Texas A&M, not a Devontae Smith type receiver at Alabama. And I think that's going to be an issue for him Saturday.
Arkansas, to me, is one of the bigger surprises, even at 2-3, because I thought they might be Vanderbilt levels of bad this season, even with Felipe Franks coming in at quarterback. But they've looked, not good, but much better than they had the last 2 years. They probably should have beaten Auburn if the SEC reviews that play right. They played Texas A&M well. They've looked pretty good. Barry Odom's called a great defense all year. Felipe Franks has been pretty efficient on offense.
Is Sam Pittman the SEC Coach of the Year, guys?
Yeah, I was going to say that. Josh mentioned him, Arkansas being kind of one of the surprise stories. I feel like if Arkansas can get to 4 or 5 wins, Sam Pittman could really gain some momentum as being SEC Coach of the Year. I think coming into this season, there was some thought, and coming into a lot of seasons, there's some discussion about whether the SEC can get 2 teams into the playoff. At this point, Alabama obviously has established itself as the favorite in the SEC, but how realistic of an avenue do you think exists for the SEC to get a second team in the playoff? I'm kind of curious of, how things go obviously in Georgia, Florida, but it seems to me that it could be kind of difficult for the SEC to get a second team in.
Yeah, it's got to be one of those 2 East teams playing this weekend in Florida and Georgia. Georgia, we've already seen lose to Alabama, so I guess really their only shot, I would think, is to win out and then either beat or compete with Alabama in the SEC championship game, which, based on that first game, I find it hard to see them doing that with what we just talked about and not having that explosive offense. Florida, maybe if Florida, beats Georgia pretty well, can win out, can go to the SEC championship game, can challenge Alabama at least, maybe they have a path to that 4 spot, but it's going to be tough because you looked at Florida early in the season, they've already lost Texas A&M. The defense hasn't looked great. They're going to have to play better on that side of the ball to have a shot. But yeah, I think the SEC, I guess, could get to, because there isn't really a gimme team for that fourth spot this year outside of the big three, but it's not a super easy path at this point.
At this point, it's just so hard to see anybody beating Alabama. I mean, even whether it's Georgia, Florida, whoever gets in that SEC championship game, I at this moment, I don't think either of those teams can beat Alabama. So I think the SEC for sure has one, but and another to throw out there, if there's ever a year one of these group of 5 teams could get into the playoff, Cincinnati could end up having about as good a case as a team has ever had to do that.
Wanted to touch on the pandemic and how that has affected the season. Has it affected, do you feel like, the performance, the play, the way things have unfolded in the SEC, more or less about the same than you would have expected coming into this season?
The fact that some games have been canceled and moved, I thought was inevitable with what they were trying to do. I think it's remarkable that the SEC's managed to play as many games as they have without having to shuffle the schedule. I guess if Nick hadn't had 3 positive tests in 35 minutes and had not coached against Georgia, we might view that a little differently. But, Alabama's navigated it pretty well. So it has had an effect. I don't know that Vanderbilt was going to be strong anyway, and it certainly had an effect on them.
Yeah, there's obviously been an effect, but it hasn't been, I guess, you look around the country and it hasn't been as bad as that, it seems. It seems like there's teams maybe in the Big 12 or not the Big 10 with Wisconsin that are just struggling to get on the field. SEC's had a couple of cancellations, but not, like you said, something major happened yet, outside the Nick Saban thing, which got cleared up before kickoff because they had a jet and it worked. So we haven't seen the craziness yet.
Let me tell you, Josh, if that jet hadn't worked, they have another jet. They have all the jets.
They would have found a jet.
They would have found another jet, I promise you.
So, I mean, it hasn't gone perfectly, but I don't think anyone thought it would. But the worst would be, let's say Georgia has an issue this week before they play Florida. If you give the week of a big game and, there's a build-up for Florida because they've already had an issue, so maybe they can't reschedule. And, I mean, there are still some instances where I don't think we should view this as over yet. But in terms of performance on the field, I'll tell you guys, I learned with the NFL's Tennessee Titans, they went into a Tuesday night game. Everybody thought they didn't have a chance after not practicing in like 2 weeks, and they blew out the Bills. So who knows?
So your takeaway, Gentry, practice really doesn't matter all that much.
That's right. There's like teams all around the league going, hey, look at dude. But
just show up on Saturdays. You're good.
All right, guys, we'll take that Dan Mullen segue and close with a look at our game of the week. It's obviously Florida, Georgia. I'll start the picks off here. I take Florida. I picked Florida to win the East coming into the season, so I might as well stick with that. The Texas A&M game still surprises me a little bit, but I just have a hard time picking a Stetson Bennett-led offense to keep up and outscore the Gators.
Yeah, to me, this is kind of the same pick as Alabama, Georgia, where it's what's more important, an elite offense or an elite defense. And in the Alabama, Georgia game, it was clearly the offense. And I think it'll be the same this one. I think Georgia has the best defense in the SEC, but that doesn't matter if you're going to score 27 points. Florida can go score 40, and if it does, you're going to lose that game. So I think Florida's defense, is going to start playing not great, but maybe better than it was earlier in the year. And if the offense keeps doing what it's doing, I don't think Georgia can keep up.
I'm going to pick Florida for the same reasons that you guys have already elucidated. And I will say this, it's an obstacle that Dan Mullen needs to get over. He needs to win this game, this particular rivalry game. And Georgia psychologically has had the upper hand now for most of the recent past of this series. And so Florida's got to overcome that.
For some reason, Dan Mullen has not been a great matchup against Kirby Smart, Nick Saban style of defense. That goes back to when he was at Mississippi State. So I think there's just something about this game that I agree, Cecil. It's a big hurdle for Dan Mullen in Florida. You know, the last week's been some distractions. They had the fight against Missouri. I'm leaning Georgia in this game because I think Florida is the team that has to prove they can go win it. I think Georgia playing Alabama pretty well for a half in Tuscaloosa and being in that game, they've seen a tough game already. You know, Florida went to College Station, lost their game, but you know, I don't think they've seen a defense quite as good as what Georgia is going to be. So I like Georgia in a close one, but you know, with some real uncertainty about what to expect from Georgia's defense, I will say that.
Enjoy the action this week, and we'll be back next week to break it down.